This is Enaa in with you in the Fight Back. And today I'm not going to really review anything with you. I'm just going to give you a basic rundown of some of the fundamentals of Marxism in perhaps a simplified or simplistic form. To start with, for me, Marx and Engels are two of the foremost influences on my thought and practice as a historian and political activist. Among the many tools I've adopted from Marx and Engels is that of dialectics. I say this knowing that many frown upon dialectics because it's a bunch of mumbo-jumbo. What I mean by the dialectic is the study of contradictions of society in order to understand society's laws of motion. Dialectics recognizes nothing as permanent except change. Whether Marxist is looking at an individual or a social structure, foremost among the questions asked is what changes take place? What are the contradictions that propel that development or process? Lest you think that I believe we are destined to reach the socialist millennium, know that I reject any attempt to ascribe a vulgar conception of progress or determination to Marxism. Marx says that people make history, but not in circumstances that they choose. In other words, the Marxist looks at the dialectic interaction of class and the larger social totality for how change comes or does not come about. The analysis of the larger social totality is absolutely central to Marxism. Each society or mode of production is based upon some form of surplus extraction from the producing classes. Marx identified several modes of production: ancient slave systems, the tributary or the Asiatic, feudalism, and the wage system or capitalism. Each form of surplus extraction has its own laws of motion. For instance, capitalism is based on the self-valorization of capital through the exploitation of the proletariat. These laws of motion play themselves out in the class struggle between those producing a surplus and those expropriating the surplus, or to be more blunt, the exploiting class, over control of the surplus. However, the class struggle is not necessarily confined to the economic sphere, but extends to the political, cultural, ideological sphere, or the superstructure. For instance, many of the texts we see in society, the books we read, show traces of the class struggle. The class struggle is played out between the direct producers and those exploiting them. This struggle can end in several ways: either the sublimation or the overcoming transformation of the mode of production by a different or higher mode of production, or the ruin of the contending classes. In other words, Marxism can tell you there will be a struggle, but can't guarantee the outcome. The Marxist method of analysis may be extended to nearly all previous modes of production, with their own peculiarities and differences from others. However, my focus as a Marxist and historian and activist has been on the capitalist mode of production, so it is necessary to look there for a moment. As outlined by Marx, the capitalist mode of production is based on the separation of the proletariat from the means of production. Thus, the proletariat is forced to sell its labor power to the capitalist for a wage. The proletariat is exploited and dehumanized in the process. The capitalist uses the surplus extracted from the working class in order to accumulate profits. Thus, the logic of capital is based on the greater accumulation of profit, not on human needs. The worker under capitalism is not merely exploited by capital, but is alienated from the products of their labor. According to Marx, labor is the way that human beings develop their creativity and individual talents as part of their communities. This is the essence of humanity. That's what separates us from the animals: our ability to labor, to think, to work with our hands. Work should be how humans develop and express their humanity. This is not so under capitalism. Here, labor is not the expression of the needs of the worker or the humanity of the worker, nor is labor's life's prime need. We don't labor to we don't labor as something we generally want to do. We labor in order to live. Instead, the humanity of labor is turned into something alien under capitalism. Labor under capitalism serves the needs of an alien class, the capitalists. Thus, what is human, the labor, the ability to think, to work with our hands, becomes a burden to the worker. And what is animal, eating, drinking, procreation, becomes human. The worker under capitalism is thus not only exploited, but alienated and dehumanized. The worker under capitalism sees the world in many ways in the ideological sphere. For example, the ruling class produces the ruling ideas through the consent/control of various apparatuses in civil society, such as churches, political parties, the media, etc. However, the alienation of the workers in capitalism also has an ideological effect on perception. Since the worker is producing products for an alien class and not for him or herself, the products of the proletariat's labor in their totality are dominating the proletariat, with the control of said products in the hands of the capitalist class. The worker thus sees things as dominating him or her and his or her class. The domination of things thus means that the worker sees the social relations of capitalism not as between people, but as relations between things. This can in turn produce a distorted view of capital in its totality, which Marx developed via his theory of commodity fetishism. Not only is the proletariat exploited and alienated by capital, but its perception of that domination is distorted and manipulated. However, this domination is not so total or absolute that capital's rule is made eternal. Despite the proletariat's alienation and exploitation, the nature of its being, the surplus value of producers exploited by capital, compels it to struggle against capital, just as capital needs to exploit the proletariat to the utmost to gain the most profit. The proletariat wants more of the products of their labor in order to live. Thus, despite what the proletariat may consciously believe, members may be pro-capitalist. Its class position will compel it to struggle against capital. This struggle takes on a variety of forms, just as previous class struggles took on a variety of forms in the base and superstructure. For instance, the proletariat struggles through resistance on the job. There are unions, strikes, parties, alternative culture, and insurrection, to name a few means. And the struggle of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie may, or may not, culminate in a revolution leading the way to communism. The proletariat revolution, as conceived by Marx, is much different from previous social revolutions in history. The proletariat will achieve its revolution based upon self-emancipation. Thus, the goal of the proletariat will not be achieved by begging the exploiters for reforms of the social democratic view, nor by a militant minority ruling in a dictatorship until the workers are educated enough to rule themselves, the blankist view. To put it succinctly, the emancipation of the proletariat is the task of the proletariat itself. The proletariat will then form its own state in the process of withering away, the commune, the Soviet, the council, and this will be based upon social ownership, not state ownership, of the means of production. This social ownership will be organized democratically, socially by the workers themselves. The goal of social ownership will be the satisfaction of collective needs that will lead in turn to the creation of social rich in their needs human beings. This new system of communism will overcome the defects inherited from capitalism and other modes of production, such as dehumanization, exploitation, alienation, and reification, to name a few. This is a condensed view of some of the fundamental points of Marx's view of capitalism and communism. For me, Marxism, in its brutally compressed formula, is the theory and practice of proletariat self-emancipation. And, again, this is just a simplified view. I hope you find it useful. This is Enaa. Till next time.